Good day, everyone. All right, here's another extra credit assignment for you. This one involves a communication technique called reflective listening. Now, I'm supposing that many of you are already familiar with reflective listening, and if so, that's great. And stay tuned in because I'm going to be talking about reflective listening from the point of view of practice, which is a bit unusual, and so there may be some interesting things in here that you haven't considered before. So I'm going to talk about what reflective listening is, and then I'm going to talk about how it can be used and how effective it is, practically speaking, in relationships with other people. And then I'm going to talk about it in terms of practice and why it's useful in terms of spiritual practice. So in terms of what reflective listening is, it's actually really simple. When you're practicing reflective listening, you're basically just saying back to someone, the person you're communicating with, whatever they are saying in their own words. Okay? Very simple. So for example, let's say your partner comes home and says, yeah, well, I went to the hardware store today and I got nails and some sandpaper. And you say, if you're reflecting that person, you say to him or her or them, so you went to the hardware store today and you got some nails and sandpaper. So right back to them in their own words. And then let's say the person goes on and says, yeah, and I was going to get the paint for the living room, but when I went to look at the colors, there's just so many choices I couldn't figure out, and so I wanted to wait so I can get your help picking out the color. And so you say, well, so when you wanted to get the paint for the living room, but when you went to look at the paint, there were just so many colors you couldn't choose, and so you wanted to come back and get my help in picking out the color. So like that. Now that's a very obvious way of reflecting. In that case, I reflected back everything that was said, but it also can be more subtle. So like in the first example, it could be, you could just say, oh, you got the nails and the sandpaper. Okay, that's a form, but that's much more subtle. Sometimes people will object to being reflected because they kind of dope out, they're using some kind of technique on them, and for some reason they feel offended by that or uncomfortable with that. For me, I love to be reflected. I love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, for reasons I'll talk about later. So someone is doing it with me, I don't have any problem with that at all, but sometimes people do. So sometimes, it's good to be subtle about it. Or in the second case about the paint, you could just say, oh, so you brought it home so I could check out the colors with you and help you make the decision. So just super simple reflecting there. So why would we want to do such a thing? So this is the practical part of it. Oh, and I wanted to tell you that, so when I send out this assignment, I'm going to include a link in the text that goes with it to another video that Mary Carmen and I made for the Practice Partners program. In which we talk about this in much more depth. There's an actual demo that I do, and also there's some other facilitation techniques called clarifying and drawing out that are in that video too, that you can check out so you can get more information. This is basically a facilitation technique. So that's one way you can think about it, is you're practicing facilitating another person as they're speaking about whatever they want to speak about, and you're kind of providing a space for them to share whatever they're sharing, and you're sort of supporting them in that. Okay? So why would we do that? Why would we want to practice such a thing? Well, one reason is because if you are reflecting someone, you are present with them. This starts to get into the spiritual practice part, but I'll talk about more of this in a little bit. You are present with them. You have to be present with them in order to hear what they say and reflect back to them. Do you know how it is? Well, often it is when somebody's speaking, you're not really listening. You're actually, what you're listening to is your own thoughts about what you're going to say in return, or, something, maybe you're having some opinion about what they're saying or something like that. We're completely letting that go when we're practicing reflective listening. We're letting go of any agenda we have, any opinions we have, anything like that. And we're just practicing being completely present with the other person, making a space for them to speak, and truly listening to what they're saying, and then saying it back to them. So, and it feels really good. It feels super good to be reflected. That's why I love it so much, because I know, and I don't just know, but I can feel that the other person is present with me, that they're truly listening to me. And that feels really good. I mean, true listening in our culture, in our society, is very rare, actually, I think. You know, people are distracted and they're having a conversation with conditioned mind. At the same time, they're attempting to have a conversation with an outside person. And so people, you know, they're not really there for each other a lot of times. And so this is a way you could practice being here and present. So it feels really good to be reflected, and it feels really good to reflect. Another thing that is really helpful about this is it helps to keep a person from getting entangled. I was just speaking with somebody recently about a situation she was in with her family, and there's just some really difficult things going on that involve some really hurtful communication. And we talked about reflective listening, and she was practicing reflecting. Like when somebody would say something difficult or hurtful to her, she would just reflect it. And it gave her a space to be where she could still be involved and still be connected with them, but not entangled. Because, you know, if you think about it, if you're reflecting, you're not giving anything back, you're not agreeing or disagreeing, so there's no entanglement that happens. You're just basically staying, ideally, you know, in a centered place as that person is speaking, and you're just saying back to them what they're saying. It's really very powerful. So how might this apply? You know, so one way it might apply, just some examples. So let's say, you know, your partner comes home, or, you know, it doesn't have to be your partner. It could be your child, your parent. Maybe you're at work and you're talking with a coworker, and they're expressing something that's going on with them. You know, it's like, wow, there's this thing that happened today that's really bothering me. And then you say, well, there's this thing that's happening today that's really bothering you. And they say, yeah, so-and-so said that, and then that happened, and then that happened. And you say back, so-and-so said that, and then that happened, and then that happened. So you're reflecting back to them what they're saying. And the result of that is they're going to feel really heard by you. They're going to feel like you're really there with them. They're going to feel like you understand, like that. And that, of course, is really good. And it builds trust. It builds connection. You know, as opposed to, you know, like I come home and I've got something going on and I want to share it with you, and I try to speak it, but you're not really there and you're not really paying attention. That doesn't feel good. Or worse, you start giving me advice, you know, or you start telling me what I should do, or, you know, or even worse than that, you start making me wrong for the way I feel, and, you know, all this ugly conditioned stuff that we do to each other when we're unconscious. So instead of that, I mean, that doesn't result in good things. That doesn't result in connection and, you know, a shared intimacy and trust between two people. But to reflect someone and to facilitate them while they're speaking really does. Okay, so that's kind of one level. So another level might be, let's say that your partner comes to you, or your child or your parent or your coworker or your boss, and says, you know, there's this thing that is just really not working in our dynamic. You know, the other night when you said such and such, I really felt such and such, and that's been really troubling me. And then you reflect them and you say, so you feel like there's something that's really not working in our dynamic. The other night when I said such and such, you felt such and such, and you're really feeling troubled by that. So imagine the effect of that. And many of you, I'm sure, have had the experience already of trying this and seeing the effectiveness of that. You know, if I was coming to you and I was feeling troubled or unhappy about something that was going on, and I expressed that to you, and then you reflect it back to me, that's going to feel great. And even if it's something difficult, that's still going to feel great, because I know that you're with me and you're really listening to me and you're open to me, because you're demonstrating that by the way you're reflecting. You know, if you instead go to defend yourself or try to make me wrong or make excuses or say, you know, well, that wasn't a big deal, or, you know, something like that, the kind of things, unfortunately, that we do, I'm not going to feel heard. That's not going to feel good. And likely the conversation is not going to go well. We're going to end up in some kind of conflict. And then, you know, you reflect me, and then I'll go on and I'll talk about, you know, why that troubled me and what's happening with that, and maybe what I want to be different. And you're reflecting that along the way. And you can do that even if you don't agree. Maybe you completely disagree with everything I'm saying. That's okay. You can still reflect, and you can allow yourself to reflect back in a way that makes it clear that you're there and you're listening and you're open, and then the other person feels really heard. Now imagine that both people are doing that. So it's a situation where there's a disagreement. You know, your partner or whoever says to you something, you reflect them back until they have said what they say. And then you go to say, well, you know, what I see about that is actually a little bit different. Here's what I see. And then your partner is reflecting to you. That's just dynamite, because then there's a mutual understanding. And then the other person, you know, your partner, actually is truly going to be listening to you as you do that. It solves a lot of problems and avoids a lot of conflict. Okay, so the next level up. And I've had this experience any number of times in my life, actually, where somebody is actually really angry at me or really upset with me and is actually acting out their conditioning on me. So they come to me and say, you, blah, 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 I can't believe you, blah, 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 or whatever, you know, how people do. Now, of course, the tendency is, for me, is going to be get defensive or maybe aggressive or passive aggressive, something like that, because as in a reaction to the condition that's getting put on me, maybe I'm going to be tempted to act back with my own conditioning in that way. But instead, if I can remember to be present and reflect, it's going to diffuse the situation. So, you know, somebody says, oh, I can't believe you just, and I reflect that right back to that person. You can't believe I did that. You're really upset right now, you know, and reflect that back in that way. Even in the middle of that highly charged situation, they're going to feel really heard and understood. And I have lots of experience with this, of how that really can diffuse a situation in a way that is good and helpful. Because when people are generally expecting to be resisted and expecting, you know, some kind of conflict and to be fought with. And instead, if you don't bring any of your own conditioning to it, and you just say back to them what's being said and make it obvious you're open and that you're hearing what they're saying, then the other person can let down their own conditioning. You know, of course, it's not guaranteed they will do that. It depends on how determined they are to cling to it. But it gives them some space and some permission to do that. And it's very much been my experience that if I can stay centered in that way and communicate from a centered place, which is what reflective listening sort of assists me in doing. It assists me in communicating in a centered way. Then a lot of times the other person will just let go of their own energy around it, and then we can have actually a good conversation about whatever it is that's going on and, you know, resolve whatever the issue is. Okay? All right. So that's the practical parts of it. In terms of spiritual practice, I find this to be really useful because it requires me to be present and it requires me to let go of my own conditioning on a whole bunch of different levels. So on one level, you know, it requires me to let go of my own agenda. So, you know, maybe I feel like I know what the other person needs to do, but you know, and that's generally not helpful. It's generally not helpful to offer people unsolicited advice, in my opinion. And so that's just a conditioned pattern we have. And so that if I'm reflecting, I can't do that. If I'm reflecting back, there's no space in there to offer somebody else advice. So then the thing that I'm practicing blocks me from doing the conditioned thing that I want to do. And so it causes me to look at it and causes me to be aware of it. Or another example, this is super common and again, from my point of view, extremely unhelpful and unskillful. We can have a tendency to want to rescue other people from the experiences they're having. So maybe somebody's having a hard day, they're having some difficult feelings about something, you know, we want to come in, typically, a lot of times, and say, oh, well, don't feel that way, or it's okay, or we might want to tell them how great they are, you know, or something, or how bad the other person was who was involved, or something, in order to kind of rescue them from their experience and help them get to a place where they're not feeling the way they're feeling. Super unhelpful, at least in the way I look at things. Much more helpful to allow the person to have the experience and give them a space to process their experience so they can get to a centered place in themselves in relationship to it, instead of basically just assisting them in avoiding it. Okay? And reflective listening is really good for that too. You know, so somebody says, God, I'm having such a hard time with such and such. And you say, so you're having such a hard time with such and such. All right? So anyway, in terms of spiritual practice, maybe that's a karma that I have to want to come and rescue people. Well, again, if I'm practicing reflective listening, I can't do that. And so I'm going to have to be aware of that. And I'm going to be aware of the drive to do that and the urge. And, it's probably going to be really difficult to resist. And that's good. That's good practice to be aware of it and practice making a choice about that. On another level, kind of like we were just talking about, like I was talking about a few minutes ago, somebody is being belligerent towards me. They're angry. They're trying to take their conditioning out on me. I can be, if I'm reflecting, I'm going to be aware of my own condition that comes up in response, my own tendency maybe to take stuff out on the other person, to be aggressive or passive aggressive or whatever. So again, it fosters awareness. It fosters awareness of my own process and asks me to look at that and let it go. And, as I was saying at the beginning, in order to reflect, you have to be present. You actually have to be here to do it. And so it's a way to practice being present in relationship with other people, which, as I'm sure you have discovered for yourself, is extremely difficult to do. As soon as we open our mouths and start talking, presence goes out the window a lot of times, and we go into our conditioning and into our stories and into our beliefs and opinions about things. And so it's a sort of a tangible way to practice being present with another human being. Okay, so, and again, check out the video that I'll put in the link so you can get some more information about the technique and what that's like. So here's your assignment. Your assignment is to practice reflective listening. And it can be anywhere in your life. And I do this. I practice reflective listening as I go through my life in all kinds of situations. So for example, maybe I'm at the grocery store and I'm going through the line and there's the clerk at the who's checking out my groceries. And I'll say to him or her or them, well, how's it going? And they'll say, well, it's going okay. And I'll say, oh, it's going okay. And they'll say, yeah, well, there's this thing going on. They tell me about the thing. And I say, oh, there's this thing going on. And I reflect back what the thing is. And just in a little bit, there's this connection that happens in there that I find to be really beautiful. It's so good and generous to give other people our attention. We're just starved for attention in this culture. And you can see that everywhere. And you look around and just what people are doing and the coping behaviors people are engaged in. We're just starved for attention. And to give another person attention is a beautiful thing. So in just random situations like that, you can practice reflecting. Practice reflecting with the people in your lives who you spend time with your partner, your boss, your kids, your parents, whoever that you're involved with. In just little ways, and just see what happens. See what happens. See what happens in you. Where does that cause you to go in yourself? See what happens in the other person, how they respond to that. And see what happens in terms of the relationship and what kind of openings that causes to happen in the relationship. Okay? So just go about, and as much as you feel willing for, just practice, learn the technique. If you don't know it already, learn the technique, learn how to do it, practice it, watch the effects, and then let us know what happens. Let us know what you see in the class. Okay? Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the way you're participating and showing up in the class. I really, really value it, and I really appreciate all the contributions you're making to practice in this way. Take care, be well, have a beautiful day, and I'll see you in the class.